you have to use the champions that you prefer to use, because at the end of the day, there are so many amazing champions who can do so many incredible things, and you're allowed to use more than one. Alright, what is going on, my dudes? We are back here today with the video I am incredibly excited to share with you. I've spent a very long time working on these graphics here of how I personally rank all of the champions this year released in 2021 in MCOC. Now, before we start jumping into all of this, we're going to be going over every single champion in detail, how I feel about them, what I think about them, and why they're ranked the way they are. One thing I want to point out is that these champions are not being ranked amongst each other. In fact, just to further emphasize that, we are going to be going in order from the beginning all the way to the end, from Jubilee to Kraven, because these champions are going to be ranked amongst themselves. Now, since I started my channel, all the time, countless requests. Mike, tier list. We need a tier list. We need a karate tier list. A black belt tier. We know all the tiers, man. And I always say, personally, I like looking at other people's tier lists. I like looking at other people's top 10 skill champions, top 10 cosmic champions. I like watching other people's opinions. But the way I personally view the game is that MCOC is such an incredibly complex game with over 200 characters and thousands of nodes that there are going to be champions that aren't super mega ultra beyond god tier who are better than Ghost for certain fights, and if you put them in F tier, right, it doesn't really do them justice. So personally, the way I view a champion and champions in general is kind of like this. So I want to go over pretty much the different rankings here in the criteria. So I feel like damage is kind of self-explanatory, right? There's short fights, medium fights, and longer fights, right? Because there's so many different types of content in the game. For utility, there's general utility, and that has to go with, like, you know, if they're bleed immune, if they're poison immune, if they're armor break immune, very, very general stuff. And then if they have some sort of unique type of utility that's very specific to them, for example, Spidey 2099 does not have buffs. That is a very unique piece of utility. And then there's support and synergy. For example, Mr. Fantastic. He's a very wonderful support champion. For example, a synergy is off the top of my head. Wasp gives Ghost unblockable special attacks. That's an incredible synergy, right? Viability, this is very self-explanatory. Alliance War, Alliance Quest, solo content, Act 6, Act 7 variants, Everest content, Labyrinth, and Abyss. Defense potential, this is also self-explanatory. This could be for Alliance War or the future solo competitive mode. Playability, independence. Okay, playability is how easy they are to play. Kraven, perfect example. He's at a 2 because he's very difficult to play. Who would be at a 10? Let's see. Corvus Glaive, right? Out of 10 for playability. Now, the last two are the only pieces of criteria you don't want to be on the high end for. Synergy preference and mastery preference, right? So you really want to be like at a 1 for those. You don't want to be dependent on synergies or certain masteries to be good. Everything else you want to be at a 10. So without further ado, we're going to scroll all the way down. We have one of these beautiful charts for every single champion in the entire game. Let's get set up today with Jubilee. Let's jump right in. So, the MCOC calendar year started off the same way as 2022, with a double mutant month. Now, Jubilee came to the contest kind of like a jack of all trades, but a master of none. She could shrug off damaging debuffs, turn them into shock, inflict a slow or a taunt, and had a very minor suppression and concussion ability, all depending on the firework mode that you're currently in. Now, the problem with this utility spread is that she doesn't do any of this well enough or reliably enough to choose her over other champions, especially in the most stacked class in the entire game. Now, she doesn't need her Awakened ability 95% of the time, but it does allow for some extra damage and a bit of fun against skilled champions who want to purify her debuffs. Now, she certainly does have utility and, you know, decent damage output once you fully ramp her and get some good crit RNG on the special too, making her useful in longer fights where you can max out your prowess, but she falls short to be truly useful in competitive modes like Alliance War or AQ with her clunky and mildly confusing playstyle. Now, as a damage dealer, she isn't anything special enough to choose over other champions for solo or Everest content either. 10 out of 10 animations though, very sparkly. 2 weeks later, Stryfe entered the contest, a champion who, when synergized properly, was created to try and rival Aegon in Everest content such as Labyrinth and Abyss. Now, as of December in 2021, the only known Abyss Collector solos came from an Aegon and a rank 4 Stryfe. Now, Stryfe is a ramp-up champion who excels against content with health pools in the millions. His damage per hit once fully ramped is amongst the highest in the entire game, and when you pair him with Apocalypse and Professor X, it reaches a whole new level. Now, the mutant class is about team building, whether you like it or not, and if you have a full mutant squad, Stryfe will be an excellent option for that long-form content. He's decent in solo content and competitive modes as well, especially if you want to ramp him up, but even unramped, he's an evade and a miss counter, can phase after a special 1, has consistent passive shock damage, and can avoid all Thorns type damage on his mediums, heavies, and special 2. If he's awakened and at a decent sig, he becomes more viable in those normal questing situations, allowing him to ramp at the end of each fight without needing his special 3 to ramp up. But he doesn't need to be duped in order to smash through the big boy content like Abyss like he's supposed to. Interestingly enough, while ramping him up, he isn't super suicide friendly, but once ramped with the mutant squad, he does just fine with them. Now, he also has a very outstanding synergy for Apocalypse as well that allows his personal burst damage on special 1 and special 2 to increase by 25%, up to 300% every special attack that you use. So Jubilee is decent, Stryfe is great where he's great, and the first major disappointment of the year came in the hands of Psycho Man, a champion who on paper seems to be a utility machine, but in reality has virtually no damage to make it worthwhile whatsoever. Now, his playstyle revolves around switching your mode depending on the type of utility that you need. He's the only champion with the cowardice debuff. He can manipulate the AI into being more defensive, so he gets a very high grade in the unique utility category, even though at the end of the day, he's kind of useless. He does have a synergy with Mangog, increasing his damage by a decent bit, but unfortunately, this causes him to lose all viable utility that makes him special in the first place, so he's really not useful anywhere outside of relatively simple solo content. Like, for example, one of your modes can get through all or nothing, allow the champion to use their special attacks, but at the end of the day, there are much better options that you probably have in your roster over Psycho Man, so across the board, he doesn't have the highest grades. Now, in the same month, we had arguably the most disappointing champion since Diablo, the old Diablo. Super-Skrull, another fan-favorite character, comes into the game with a seemingly counterproductive playstyle. No meaningful utility, and the damage, it just doesn't live up to the required effort to achieve it. He has buffs and certain rare immunities, and also some interesting debuffs like a Falter debuff, but this just isn't enough to make him useful anywhere off of defense, where he's quite annoying on Rich Get Richer, or also Vivified as well. As you can see, for any competitive content like War and Quest, he's ranked in out of 1. Same thing for Everest content, and solo content, I gave him a 2 because of those immunities and the ability to easily get buffs. But at the end of the day, short fights, medium fights, long fights, it doesn't really matter. His damage is just not good. And even when you can ramp him up perfectly and the AI lets you do what you need to do with Super-Skrull, it's nothing special to look at whatsoever. He very much so feels like an unfinished champion. Now, in the future, that could be good because there's a lot of potential for this champion. I say he feels like an unfinished champion, but so did Mole Man, and so did Diablo, and now they're both top of their class, top 5 skill, top 5 mystic champions in many people's eyes. Same thing for Kingpin and Falcon. I feel like Skrull is in that same scenario, same as Psycho Man, who just needs a little tiny tweak and they could be very, very good. So fingers crossed for the future for this guy, but right now, his grades are not looking too good for me. Following the theme, we have the champion who, since I started playing, was one of my most wanted characters to enter MCOC, the Mangog. You guys know me, an absolutely enormous Thor fan, one of my favorite Thor villains. When I found out Mangog was coming to the game, I was super excited. When I first started playing with him, I increasingly got less excited. So Mangog has one of the most specific playstyles in the entire game. Special 1, and then you 5-hit combo until you get to 10 in rage. You bait a special attack, and you special 2 specifically while the defender is under 1 bar of power. You hold heavy while they're stunned, you let them hit you, and then you special 2 again, walk up to the defender, and you heavy charge only half of the maximum length. And that's his like rotation per se. So there are many things wrong with that. They have to be below a special 1 before you can really get that special 2 going. They have to hit you. So in content where they're hitting pretty hard, you're not going to want to use this guy. And that's just kind of how it is. So after jumping through all those hoops, I'd want to see like literally 3 times the damage that we're seeing from Mangog. Now, that specific of a playstyle, hand in hand with his poor damage output, unfortunately just isn't viable in a competitive game mode like War or AQ, and is too stressful to be used in difficult endgame content. Casual questing? Sure. Side quests? Why not? But in difficult endgame content, no way. He gains a slight boost in damage from his Sig ability, but nothing that makes him worth investing a gem or a stone into. So he has very easy access to stagger and is immune to bleed and armor break, which makes him a very great contender for the suicide masteries. However, I find better use in Mangog spamming special 1 to consistently get the staggers on, making him suicide unfriendly when he was designed to be suicide friendly, which is interesting enough. Now, at the end of the day, unfortunately, the scariest place to see Mangog is on an increased power gain node on Alliance War defense. So right now, that's where he lives in this game. As you can see, I put him as a 9 for defense potential. He certainly has his counters, but he absolutely is quite a pain on defense. He also suffers from what I call ramp up and do it again syndrome. As you can see, short fights I have him as a 4, long fights as a 3, and medium fights as a 6. So Mangog is the type of champion who goes through all that ramp up, has that enormous big special 2, the big heavy attack does it again, and then he completely starts from scratch. And that would be okay if that medium fight rank was at like a 9 or a 10, then that would be cool. But the issue is you don't want to do that cycle more than twice in a fight. And in typical endgame content, you're doing that like more than 2 times with a rank 3 6-star Mangog, which is just, it's not cutting it. It's not cutting at all. And that playstyle is not going to be good for War or Alliance Quest, and you're not going to want to do that in solo content at all. So it's very unfortunate, but that is currently where I rank Mangog amongst the game. Odin is the only champion in 2021 to receive a 10 in the support/synergy column. His crossfight pre-fights are one of the highlights of his presence in the game, along with his synergies for both Angela and Hela. Odin is also the only champion from 2021 to already receive a buff. Now, Odin is, at release, he wasn't too usable past 1 fight, but a few months went by and his abilities got adjusted, and he's now an absolute monster in long-form content. He no longer needs to take a little break in between his fights, have someone else fight for him in order for him to be actually usable. So, you see, how Odin's damage ranking increases as a fight extends in his length. His ramp up feels a bit lengthy, but once he's ramped, you're done for the entire fight. So for short fights, I gave him a 4, medium fights an 8, and long fights a 10, because once he's ramped, you're good to go. But essentially he goes heavy, 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 special 1, heavy, special 3, heavy, special 2, and then you repeat the special 2s from there. And that's essentially how you play Odin in that big content, and you're going to be seeing a lot of beefy damage there. Now, you don't always need to fully ramp, but in those longer fights, once you're ramped, you're freaking ramped, man, and you're good to go. Now, based on the number of buffs on Odin, his special 2 will consistently be doing upwards of 250,000 damage against large health pools in Labyrinth and Abyss, which is a lot of damage. Now, another great thing about Odin is how useless his Sig ability really is. In very rare cases, it could come into play, but for what you want to use Odin for, he'll be totally fine unduped. He's decent in normal solo content as well, having a very easy access to True Strike on Special 1, and staying quite tanky after his initial ramp up. Now, he has lower scores for Alliance War and Alliance Quest because at the end of the day, there are just better options on, for attackers for what he does. And his pre-fights are certainly useful. But instead of using his, Thunderstruck pre-fight to become a 90% shock immune, there are plenty of top war attackers that are naturally just shock immune, saving you that slot and just making things a little bit easier in general. So he's definitely useful. definitely useful in the game and has his place. In Everest content like Labyrinth and Abyss, he is absolutely incredible. For solo content in general, he's very tanky, has that true strike, can do a lot of things, has buffs, right? For AQ, he's decent. For war, he could be decent, but like I said, there are other Cosmic Champions who are going to be able to do what he can do faster, better, and safer. So long fights absolutely ranks in the 10. Everest content absolutely ranks in the 10. Support and synergy, no doubt about it, ranks in the 10. Great champion, great addition to the game. Up next is Silver Centurion. Now, another tech champion who doesn't crit and has a very decent damage over time capabilities. He's bleed and shock immune. He has an armor up buff to fight havoc, slow on the heavy attack, which is really good and very useful in many different scenarios, and he has a nice heal block on the special one. Now, Silver Centurion's damage ranking could potentially go even higher for longer fights. You see I have an 8 for medium and long fights. But in order to achieve this, you'd have to break your consistent damage loop and play very haphazardly to let your lock-on fall off and apply more plasma. More often than not, I don't find this to be necessary whatsoever because his damage after his initial ramp is very nice. You combine that with a nice burst of damage on the medium ending combos after it all ramped up, and you're going to be seeing a lot of nice consistent damage from this guy. Now, the typical playstyle of Silver Boy here is to build to a special 2, doing light ending combos, and then refreshing your lock-on with the special 1, or finishing them with another special 2 if they're almost dead. His Sig ability turns all of his debuffs into passives, and the higher Sig, the longer they last before lock-on. He's fine at a low Sig, but in my opinion, he definitely does really want to be at least awakened. Now, I definitely see value for him in Alliance War and Alliance Quest. I gave him a 7 for both of these. He's definitely got a lot going on for solo questing content and game modes as well. Overall, he's a very solid addition to the game with some very useful utility. There are a lot of defenders that you just don't want to crit, a lot of defenders where you need that armor up buff, where you're going to want that passive damage over time, you're going to want the slow debuff, and he's definitely going to be useful for Alliance War, specifically with some bans coming up as well. Then there's Jabari Panther. She has a cleanse mechanic on her basic hits that makes her an amazing option for any defender or node that will place a debuff on you while attacking. Her bleed damage is also off the freaking charts when you're specifically going just for damage. However, one downside to her in vanilla matchups is that you ideally want to at least bring along one synergy champ to ramp her up faster and get that big payoff at the end of her hunt mechanic, on top of being awakened at a high Sig to extend the duration of the hunt. So, I tend to see her more suited for matchups like Hazard Shift and Biohazard and other like that, where she can pause the hunt and will be a top option even while unawakened. When she's in the hunt, she also can't be evaded, she can't miss, so Jabari has a lot of utility and a lot going on. She seems to me to be a very specific matchup type champion and doesn't lend herself too well to those vanilla matchups that, like I said, you're going to need synergy partners and a high Sig to do so anyway, along with deep wounds essentially, right? But in those special matchups, she really shines really well even unawakened. So if you're looking to use Jabari, that's where I would want to use her. I gave her a decent score for both Alliance War and Alliance Quest because there are nodes throughout that will put a debuff on you for simply playing the game, and Jabari really excels in these matchups, and there's even more of these in solo content, so making her an excellent champ to invest in for solo questing, especially if you have her duped at a decent Sig. But as you can see, she's also one of the champions who kind of ramps up and then almost starts over. However, if you go for the special 3 with her in longer fights, it makes her ramp up significantly shorter, so she doesn't go back to that starting point like in shorter fights, but where she really excels is where you build up your hunt, you get a bunch of bleeds, and then you kill them off with a heavy attack, you double all the bleeds, and that's essentially where you're going to really enjoy using her. But she has that nice unique cleanse mechanic, which is really great utility as well, and she has some decent synergies as well for other champions. I believe she has a great synergy for OG Black Panther, I think doubling his bleeds essentially, and I think she lets Tigra nullify the opponent on unblockable specials, which is really good. But yeah, overall, a very great addition to the skill class. Mr. Negative is one of my favorite champions of the entire year. He's a champion who really excels in average length fights, allowing him to ramp and nuke the defender down with an enormous special too. He's a champion who has to re-ramp for the payoff after his initial burst, so he tends to suffer in those longer fights. Now, That's okay, guys. Not every champion needs to be great for every length of fight, okay? Being at an 8 for medium length fights is a very, very good rank here. Now, his utility is off the charts, being immune to Nullify, Stagger, and Fate Seal, while also having on-demand buffs, Petrify on Special 2, Exhaustion on Special 1, Resistance to degen based on the amount of debuffs on the defender, and has a consistent counterpunch evade on his heavy attack, all making him a very versatile attacker for a variety of different scenarios. Now, his Sig ability is not required to play him on offense whatsoever, except it does allow you to heal from the degen while you're mitigating its damage. It also gives you some other effects as well, but to me, that's the most important thing by far. His stock is very high for me, specifically in Alliance War, especially with the introduction of bans. Now, I personally use him myself in map 8, so I'm telling you, he's definitely very good for that size health pool and AQ, and very often in day-to-day solo questing, he's very good for that as well. So his playstyle looks a lot more difficult than it actually is, but it's very quite consistent once you get the hang of it. As you can see, I gave him a 3 in playability. So I personally don't find him too difficult to play. You do like a parry, heavy, dash back, and then you can just either build up to 9, or you can just hold heavy and you can do the counter punch. He looks a lot more difficult to play than he actually is, and he's very enjoyable to use. But he doesn't have any game-changing synergies for other champions, so his support stock is low, but when you pair him with Nick Fury and Quake, see, I gave him 6 on the synergy dependence preference, because he's not dependent on it, but he just turns into a completely different beast when you have negative with that synergy team. And you can go check out my rank 3 Mr. Negative video if you want to see it in action. I go over all of it, why it's so crazy, the interaction and how it works. It's absolutely insane, but this guy is absolutely amazing. One of the most underrated champs of the year, one of my favorite champs of the year, no doubt about it, and super enjoyable to play too as well. So Shang-Chi was the first champion of 2021 to blow their roof off the game upon entrance. He's the type of champion who is good just about everywhere in the entire game. He has multiple 10 ratings here, guaranteed crits, cleanse charges, on-demand slow debuff, and a monstrous special 2 that will satisfy all of your big yellow number cravings. Now, he brings an interesting bit of utility in the form of controlling a fight from start to finish. With the simple medium, light, medium 5-hit combo, you stun the defender, allowing you to rush in with a medium combo and following it up by a heavy attack, and allowing you to repeat the process after baiting their special. Now, as the fight goes on, his crit damage only gets stronger with every hit you land, making him an excellent option for content like Abyss, especially in combination with his consistent slow debuff. I can't recommend you use him in Labyrinth because of Limber, but hey. Now, his versatility makes him a great option for some of the toughest nodes in Alliance War, and his bursty damage lets him nuke through AQ and solo content with ease, makes him a great contender for those 150% skill boosts for Alliance War and stuff like that. He doesn't need to be awakened for any of this, by the way. It gives him extra damage, but don't let that hold you back from investing in Shang-Chi. Amazing with the Suicide Masteries. You shrug them off with one medium light medium combo. Undoubtedly one of the top skill champs in the game and a top champ from 2021. It's very hard to argue differently. He doesn't need any synergies and hardly gains any benefit at all from them. Up next, we have possibly the most common champ of the year in Sigil Witch. She brings a very unique way to nullify buffs by doing so on parries and creates instability with her special 1, and then randomly gains buffs based on the amount that she has. She can then go for a big special 2 or cash in those instabilities with a giant special 3 with some monstrous degen damage. She's another champion who ramps, explodes, and then dies down a bit, and then ramps and explodes and then dies down a bit, making her amazing for medium length fights unless you utilize your heavy attack to keep your stabilities in check while going for special 2s. Now, her stock is above average for me in Alliance War at the moment, but with bans, I can see her being a decent replacement for some of the commonly used mystics in the game. Personally, I see her more as like a solo questing champion who can easily deal with the influx of unblockable and unstoppable buffs simply by parrying that seem to be on almost every lane nowadays. So she isn't the best champ to run with suicides, and has an enormous benefit from Mystic Dispersion. Her Sig ability is nice to have, but nothing is preventing you from utilizing her unawakened. Overall, she's a very good champ, and many people agree she's one of the better champions in 2021. I definitely see her having a lot of value going forward, but personally, I see more value in solo questing content over Alliance questing content. And up next, got Purgatory. Now, I remember being very sad while playing this champion. She's a champion who needs to ramp up against specific class types, and then the benefits from that ramp only last for a short period of time, and if you need a certain piece of utility from that ramp, well, it can't be accessed if that class type isn't present before. So her damage is very underwhelming, and her utility without captured souls makes her very undesirable for competitive game modes. Her one saving grace is the ability to take off 4% of the defender's health, making her a semi-decent option for Everest content like Abyss. But at the end of the day, there are just better options for Abyss as well. Now, I liked messing with her with the Tech Soul, giving her an armor break that helped her damage, but more often than not, she isn't worth using over other champions. She has a decent synergy for Guillotine, giving her crit bleeds, but aside from that, she's pretty forgettable. Now, for a champion with such amazing animations, I hope we do see a buff sometime in the near future, because I feel like this champion could have a lot of potential. She comes in with a 7 for longer fights because of that unique ability. Same thing for Everest content, but if that wasn't present, she would be a very, very, very underwhelming champion completely across the board. Up next, we have one of the most underrated champs of the year in Overseer. Overseer is the only champ in 2021 that I graded at a 10 for playability, because he's what I like to call a get to special 3 and win champion. Now, this dude is an absolute monster in those medium-length fights. You use your special 3 as 6 cosmic power, inflict physical vulnerability, and spam light attacks for a ton of physical burst damage. If he's awakened, retaliating after specials and heavy attacks inflicts additional burst damage and increasing his damage by quite a bit, but he's definitely playable unduped as well. Now, if you run the Suicide Masteries, he gets a very large benefit from being awakened, allowing him to ramp up a little bit faster at the start of the fight. And like Negative, he's immune to Nullify, making him a great option for Buffet and Power Snack in like Alliance War and other nodes like that. He has an auto block mechanic after a special attack and goes stun immune at the same time, making him a versatile champion for a large variety of content. With upcoming bans in Alliance War, I expect to see a lot more use out of Overseer, especially since he can nuke most defenders in War down with a few combos after his special 3. In solo content, you can bring along Red Skull to ramp him up faster as well, although he doesn't need those synergies to be useful. He definitely suffers in the long fights since his initial ramp up is a tad lengthy, and he doesn't do anything too special when he isn't in his cosmic mode. So at the end of the day, he's another great addition to the science class, not the best in longer fights, but really good for that nice sweet spot health pool. Up next, we have a sea of light blue with almost a perfect score across the board. If you watch any of my videos before, you know how much I love Hercules, and for good reason. Now, I initially had his shorter fight damage ranking at a 7, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how fast his initial ramp up actually is. Now, Herc comes out swinging right out of the gate, whether he's ramped or not, and only gets stronger as the fight and the quest goes on. If you think any of this ranking is biased or too generous, well, you can go take a look at my 2-hour-long Rank 4 Hercules video where he was nuking everything down before he even got to explain any of the fights. Now, I personally consider Hercules to be the most versatile, non-game breaking champion in the game. When I say that, I mean Quake and Ghost specifically. So he's permanently stun immune, has additional 120% bursts of physical damage on every hit he lands, making him a great option for nodes like Rage and Safeguard depending on the matchup. Now, you can alter your playstyle to achieve what you need to do as well. You need to crit, go for the special 1. You need to not crit, skip it. You need buffs, use specials. Can't have buffs, don't use specials. You need debuffs, you got it. Can't have any debuffs, you also got it. Now, True Sense on the special 1, countering miss and auto block, infinitely tanking special 3s in high power gain fights, and one of the most OP abilities in the game. Nope, I'm not talking about the immortality, I'm talking about the fact that you can influence the AI with the Infuriate debuff, allowing you to take total control of the fight from beginning to end. On top of all of this, he's also 50% resistant to bleed, 80% with Coagulate, and 15% resistant to poison, making him an amazing champion to use with the Suicide Masteries. He has unblockable special attacks with the Black Panther synergy, and has an amazing synergy for heroes, giving 15% additional attack if they have the Liquid Courage Mastery active, essentially giving him plus 75% bonus for running the Suicide Masteries. Now, I haven't even touched on his ridiculous Sig ability, making him permanently unblockable, increasing combat power rate by 35% at Sig 200, and granting an immortality buff that can last upwards of 45 seconds. So I assigned my battle groups map 8, and more than half our attackers are bringing Hercules every day to AQ, so he's got a perfect score there. I consider Herc to be a top 5 overall war attacker, and is almost usually a top option for solo questing, so he's got perfect scores there as well. One of the most incredible things about him is how his playability slides to a 10 if you can play him like a vanilla champion. Now, the way he's designed to be played, I have him as a 7, with all the intercepting and intercepting with specials. Of course, the Infuriate debuff makes things easier, but at the end of the day, you don't have to do this to get all of the benefits that I've listed. Now, yes, you get triple the buffs that you would normally get, but just parrying, heavying, 5-hit combo, and special attacks, he's going to be an absolutely amazing champion for you no matter what your skill level is and where you play the game. Also, prestige is not a factor in any of these rankings, but he does happen to be a top 5 prestige champion as well. If you have Hercules, it's just an absolute no-brainer to rank this guy up at this point. And then in the same month, we have America Chavez. So America could certainly do some things, but she just has almost no damage in 90% of the scenarios, making her hardly ever worth using. In certain super buff heavy matchups, she could do some things, but you know, at that point, you're better off using almost any other Mystic champ to take advantage of those buffs in a better way. She can cheese past a power gain by spamming heavy in the corner, but there are other champs in 2021 who could just do it better. She doesn't necessarily need her Sig ability to do the things I said, but at the end of the day, her best use is to be a pain in the butt on defense. Fortunately, this is the last totally underwhelming champ of 2021. Up next, we have another one of my personal favorite champs in the entire game, and that's Spidey 2099. If you play high tier war, then you understand the usefulness of this guy already. He's one of 2 champs in the game to not gain any buffs, completely turning off all Mystic Dispersion and any Mystic champ who punishes buffs in any way. He takes 75% reduced damage from all sources whenever True Strike is present, and is currently the only champion in the game with a Wither debuff, one of the most powerful debuffs in the entire game at the moment. Wither reverses all power gain effects by 125%. His can stack up to 5 times. If you have the Anti-Venom synergy with you, Spidey starts the fight with the Wither active. His heavy attack places an exhaustion. This stacks up to 5 times. Each of these reduces power gain even more by another 15%. That adds up to minus 700% power gain. That's like pretty decent. So this counts for all power gain, by the way. This is any buff, passive like Doctor Strange, kinetic transference, rich get richer, and many others. He has a slow debuff on his special 3 and a physical vulnerability debuff on his special 1. Oh yeah, and you could pause all of these debuffs just by dexing. Now his special 2 is enormous and has additional burst damage for each individual debuff on the opponent. Mr. Fantastic debuffs count, by the way. And on top of all of this, every hit he does has a % chance to place a Rupture on the opponent, and every hit onto the block while a Wither is active has a 100% chance to place one as well. And all of these Ruptures explode as the opponent crosses over a bar of power. He doesn't need to be awakened to do any of this, but his Sig ability gives him additional power rate while Wither is active, and up to an 80% chance for the Ruptures to re-trigger every time they explode. This increases his damage significantly by quite a bit, but absolutely is not required to play the champ. I gave him a 10 for war and solo questing for all this incredible utility and above average damage output. He's decent in AQ, particularly the Magneto bosses in map 7, and he fits the Spider globals for map 8. But at the end of the day, he's more so suited for war and solo questing for me. He's decent for some fights in the Abyss, but at the end of the day, there are better options for that giant content. Overall, in my opinion, one of my top 5 favorite champs in all of 2021. Up next, we have my current most wanted champ as a 6-star, Peni Parker, the only champ to rank in at 10 for defensive potential. Peni has a kit that seems to be designed all around for Alliance War, both offensively and defensively. Now, she's immune to Poison and Incinerate, making her a great option for Hazard Shift and Node 49, essentially turns off Kinetic Transference and has a reliable Power Burn and Heal Block mechanic, and on top of all of that, has some pretty respectable damage too. Now, she's stun immune with a Synergy and has an Auto Block mechanic to save you if you mess up, and she's pretty tanky as well. She also completely cheeses Nick Fury when she's awakened, essentially killing him as he tries to, jump up in his second life. Now, aside from that cheesy interaction though, she doesn't really need to be duped to be useful for 95% of the content that you want to use her for. She's very valuable for war and has the damage output and ease of playability to be a useful champ on certain nodes in map 8, and is a beast in general solo questing as well. She has a very smooth playstyle and a very satisfying, enormous special too. She doesn't need any synergies to be useful herself, but you'll notice I ranked her in at 8 for support. She has absolutely incredible synergies for Spider-Gwen, Mysterio, and Airwalker, making all 3 of those champions so much better. Definitely a very, very solid addition to the tech class. Up next, we have another fan favorite champion, Kitty Pryde. Kitty is an absolute utility machine with outstanding damage that ramps higher as the fight goes on, and unlike other champions who seem to almost reset after their burst of damage is over, Kitty feels like she's right back in the mix, ready to keep going. I almost think of Kitty kind of like an anti-version of Ghost, phasing while dashing forward instead of dashing backwards. Kitty has a very strong Sig ability, allowing her to negate 100% of all damage while phasing, similar to Ghost synergy with Hood. Now, while she's phased, she's also stun immune. That's pretty darn good. Unlike Ghost, she actually benefits from miscounters, making her objectively pretty much the best option to the true focus node. If you use your special 3 while phased, you'll have a 4-second phase after the special is over, allowing you to eat a combo from the Hidden Defender and chaining special 3s until the defender is dead. Now, cheese aside, she benefits incredibly highly from the Suicide Masteries and a few synergies too. While phased, instead of taking 5% recoil damage, you essentially heal 5% back from Liquid Courage Mastery throughout the length of the special attack. Magneto gives her additional Furies per each debuff on Kitty while phasing, Ghost gives her additional prowess while getting hit through the phase, aiding in massive special damage, and most OP of all, the Tiger synergy essentially makes her permanently unblockable while she's above 10 prowess. You notice how these synergies are with Magneto, Tigra, and Ghost, right? 3 other ridiculous champs. She also has an amazing synergy that extends Tigra's neutralized by 35%. For any ordinary matchup where cheese isn't needed, you essentially want to go for the special 1 to build up the potency of your prowess and then destroy them with the special 2. For longer fights, you can go for the special 3 to get a longer incinerate, but I find this to be unnecessary more often than not. I placed her stock at a solid 10 for Alliance War, Alliance Quest, and solo questing, joining Hercules as the only 2 champs in 2021 who, in my opinion, have perfect scores in the 3 most important categories. The community seems to be a bit split as to whether Hercules or Kitty Pryde is the best champ of the year. But the whole point of this video and this format is to try and show you that at the end of the day, it just really doesn't matter. You have to use the champions that you prefer to use, because at the end of the day, there are so many amazing champions who can do so many incredible things, and you're allowed to use more than one. Up next, we have Nimrod, the guy that many people dub the Tech Human Torch. If you check out his damage rankings, he has a separate bar specifically for when he's fighting mutant champions. Now, because similar to Torch against Mystics, he just ramps up faster, increasing his overall damage per second and damage per hit. Nimrod's a robot, so of course he has some solid immunities out of the gate and is a great contender for the Suicide Masteries. On top of that, he has some interesting power control mechanics, and most importantly, the ability to eat prowess and regen just by hitting the opponent in one of his 2 modes. Now, his stock is at a 10 for me in War at the moment, since he's one of 3 champs who can remove passive and active prowess, essentially being able to cheese right through both with Path 6 and War. His playstyle is very simple as long as you keep an eye on your modes, and he's decent and tanky in AQ. And he's going to be useful whenever there's a mutant champion on the path in solo content. Now again, he's decent against the mutant champs in Everest content like Abyss and Labyrinth, but there are definitely just going to be better options to bring along than Nimrod for those fights. I see Nimrod's value lying in taking down tough mutant defenders in Alliance War currently. He gains a really big benefit from being awakened even at Sig 1. That's when he's going to ramp up much quicker against these mutant champions, and he's going to have unblockable special attacks as well. He can remove prowess on awakened, but you won't see the benefits of that dark blue line until you get him duped. Halloween month started with Anti-Venom. Now, Anti is a very decent utility champ who suffers from a slow start. His damage can increase very, very highly. However, he must sacrifice most of his utility to exchange his debuffs to passive Furies. His block proficiency is pretty awful, but this is remedied by his regen on block that adds into the positives with the recovery mastery. He's immune to poison and incinerate, making him a decent war attacker, but his biggest strength in war comes from the synergy he gives to Spidey 2099, allowing him to enter into the fight with a Wither debuff already active on the defender. Now, he can reverse healing really well with his Petrify and Spectre debuffs, but so can a lot of other champs already in your roster. Now, his playstyle is relatively straightforward and rewards patience with the Special 1, Special 3, Special 2 rotation, resulting in some monster passive Furies that are very satisfying to look at with some good crit RNG. Now, all in all, he's a very good champion with some very solid damage potential, but he lags behind the other Science champions released this year for overall usefulness. There's nothing wrong with being a very good champion. He's just not an absolutely amazing champion, in my opinion, but he absolutely has his uses. Following Anti-Venom was Knull, a very long-awaited champion who entered the contest jam-packed with utility and disastrous damage potential. You're going to see Knull excel in long-form content where he could build up an obscene amount of armor breaks and just decimate his opponent, all while consistently regenerating the entire fight. His mediums and heavies can't be evaded or auto-blocked, and he's 60% resistant to bleed and poison. He also reduces defensive combat power rate on the opponent by a decent bit. He's one of the most suicide-friendly champs in the game and gains a large benefit from that mastery setup. He's also very playable without them as well, though. In shorter fights, Knull will suffer if he isn't awakened and at a decently high sig. His damage isn't stellar right out of the gate, but when he's sigged up, it rapidly increases his ramp up, and you see some sweet damage on the defender much quicker. Now, awakened or not, he's an amazing option for nodes like Diss Track or whenever else you need multiple debuffs. He also has a pretty sweet synergy for other symbiotes that grant them an enormous attack boost when they're about to be knocked out, giving them the opportunity to win a fight they might otherwise lose. Now, I have his stock ranked very highly for AQ, solo content, and Everest content. I don't currently rate him too highly for War, mostly because he's still very new and most people I know just don't have him yet. Now, I could definitely see this changing in the future, especially with the coming bans, but he wouldn't be my go-to choice for War over other Cosmic champions at the top of the meta. But all in all, I think Knull is an amazing champion, a top champ in 2021, and as you can see, overall, he ranks very highly for just about almost every category. The important ones, at least. So Sersi entered the contest with a unique ability we've never seen before, an on-demand glancing buff on her heavy attack. I enjoyed using Sersi, and she has some decent, consistent damage after a very quick and painless ramp-up, and she actually has a quite enjoyable playstyle. But I don't see this champion being too impactful for you in War, AQ, or even solo content over other champions already present in your roster. She has unblockable special attacks and a True Sense buff, plus buffs for days for nodes like Buffed Up and those new Paradox nodes where you need a bunch of buffs. But at the end of the day, I just see most of her value landing on defense, especially when she's awakened and becomes an annoying regeneration and power gain machine. So she ranks in for her, custom glancing ability with a 10 for unique, and she has some decent damage in medium and long fights, coming in with a 7. But when it comes to actual content, I don't see her being too useful compared to other champs. Now, Ikaris is a very interesting champ to me. He was bugged in 14 different directions upon release, and I believe he still has some issues going on. Now, he was designed to be a Special 1, Special 2, Special 1, Special 2, Special 1, Special 3 and win champion, but the community quickly saw more value in spamming his Special 1. Now, his damage ramps up incredibly high and makes him a decent option for long-form content like Abyss. Depending on your playstyle, his ramp-up can reset with the Special 3, or you can keep building if you focus on Special 1 and Special 2. He has Energize buffs and strong damage over time, and seems pretty sustainable, and he has resistance to poison. But I don't recommend using him with the Suicide Masteries based on the amount of specials that you're going to end up using with him. Now, there is a rotation you could do where you just heavy attack and Special 3, but at the end of the day, it's kind of boring, and there are better champions to use at that point. His Sig ability is useful in certain scenarios, but definitely isn't required to play the champion. I could see him being semi-useful in War, AQ, and solo content because at the end of the day, he's an attacker by design with a simple and effective playstyle. I think one thing that hurt his stock so badly right out of the gate is that he was released with so many bugs. I think as time goes on and he enters the featured and basic pools, we're going to see a lot more from Ikaris. Because as you can see, just based on some testing, I gave him some decent numbers, and I feel like right now he might be one of the most underrated champions of the entire year. Somebody should make a video about that. And we round out the year of champions with Kraven. Now, Kraven brings a unique mechanic of root into the game and is the only champion to have a 10 in the mastery preference category. But this isn't necessarily a good thing. In fact, it's one of Kraven's fatal flaws. Now, let me explain. On paper, Kraven is amazing, okay? You lay a trap, you push them into the trap with a heavy attack, and you refresh your bleeds with a Special 2. Now, when it's not bugged and root gets paused, but as of right now it's bugged, so he's kind of unusable at the moment, but then you repeat that. Now, to play Kraven optimally, there are some requirements. 5 out of 5 deep wounds is one of these requirements. It's also almost not enough, but unfortunately you can't go higher than 5. Now, Kraven's playstyle is incredibly high stress, and so much so that it makes him almost unusable in content like War, AQ, and most solo questing. His damage ramps very highly when the defender allows it, which isn't often. More often than not, the defender will walk backwards into their own trap and trigger it themselves, resetting your entire process there. So he has a very consistent true accuracy buff that starts on the special 1 and is up throughout most of the fight. And when the stars align and you could trigger your trap 3 to 4 times in a row, you'll have dozens of bleeds on the defender and be doing an absolute crap ton of damage. But, another downside is that he essentially needs to be awakened, and he's also so new at the moment. So this accesses his critical bleeds and makes his dash attacks unblockable while rooted. You also really want the Tiger Synergy too to place fatigues and increase your damage. So all in all, you need the perfect AI and Awaken Kraven, the Tiger Synergy, and 5 out of 5 deep wounds to see the true potential of Kraven. Which is a bit of a tall order for a champ with such an unrealistically high and stressful playstyle. He's still very new, so in time we may discover some amazing uses for him. But as of now, I hate to say it, but he's very fun in Realm of Legends. If I were to make some changes to the champion, I would make his bleeds longer, I would make his suppression stronger, and I would come up with a way to make the AI a little bit more aggressive so they don't jump into their own track. But that, my friends, my dudes, is all 24 champions. 24 champs from 2021, ranked individually amongst themselves, not with each other, throughout all different forms of content. Throughout War, Alliance Quest, solo content, Abyss, Labyrinth, short fights, medium fights, long fights, how easy they are to play, do they need synergies, do they require masteries. That is essentially let's pick a random one. 10. Oh, we're not ending there. Let's end on this one. Cool, Kitty Pryde. So yeah, that's essentially what this video was. This video is, wow, over 45 minutes. I did not expect this to be this long, but my dudes, this video took me about 12 hours to make, from the initial breakdown of all the characters to actually making the graphs to writing the script for this video. I don't usually do scripts for videos, but this is a big one, so yeah, I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would really appreciate a like, share it around if you did enjoy it, hit the subscribe button if you did enjoy it. Let me know how you feel about this format, because I like this format quite a bit. I think it's a nice way to go over the usefulness of champions and where they're going to be used best and what they're best for. I would love to do this for every champion in the game and find a way to actually look at them as a whole, but that's a different project for a different day. This is kind of like a first draft on this kind of project, so let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. Hit the subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. Drop that like, I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, let me know if you agree with these rankings in the comment section below. I'll be seeing you around.